Imagine a ballroom alive with glittering candlelight, the air thick with expectation, yet in the corner stands a man whose gaze pierces through the crowd like a blade, and a woman whose wit and spirit challenge him at every glance. Sparks of tension, pride, and secret longing crackle in the space between them. This is not just a meeting, it is the collision of two souls whose hearts speak a language far deeper than words. You will witness moments that stir the soul, reveal hidden truths, and ignite passions carefully concealed behind polite manners. Are you ready to step into the world where every glance, every word, and every pause carries the weight of desire, disdain, and destiny? From the moment Mr. Darcy entered the grand assembly, the room seemed to shift around him, though not in obvious ways that every eye could notice. There was a subtle gravity in his posture, a deliberate restraint in his movements, as if each step were measured against a standard invisible to everyone else. Ladies and gentlemen exchanged curious glances, whispering under their fans, yet no one could quite capture the essence of the man who stood so apart, so aloof, yet commanding of attention. Elizabeth Bennet, standing with your sisters and observing from a distance, felt an inexplicable tug of curiosity, a quiet warning that this stranger, who appeared so cold and impervious to social delight, might be unlike any she had ever known. Their first encounter was not marked by introductions or formal courtesy. It was a collision of worlds, subtle yet electric. Elizabeth noticed his eyes, sharp, observant, and unyielding, and found herself caught between irritation and fascination. He, in turn, noted her, the way she carried herself, with a spirited defiance beneath the polish of manners, a mind as alert as it was beautiful. She was not just another pretty face, another compliant participant in the dance of society. She was a puzzle, and he was compelled to study every facet, every expression, every carefully measured movement. It was during the first dance that the tension began to crystallize. Mr. Darcy, standing with a deliberate detachment, allowed the ladies to approach him, and Elizabeth could not help but hear the quiet observations he made to himself, often too subtle for others to grasp. His admiration, though restrained, was evident to anyone paying careful attention, though he would never admit it openly. And Elizabeth, aware of every nuance, felt the silent challenge, a dance not merely of steps, but of minds and hearts, where pride and perception collided with expectation and desire. Conversation, when it finally occurred, was a battlefield of intellect and poise. Words were chosen with care, each phrase weighted with meaning, each retort a subtle test of character. Elizabeth, never one to be easily intimidated, met every measured pause and pointed observation with wit and insight, delighting in the rare exchange that made her feel truly seen, not for her beauty alone, but for the sharpness of her mind, the courage in her opinions, the fire in her convictions. Darcy, meanwhile, found himself drawn into a pattern of observation and response, forced to navigate his own pride while contending with the unpredictability of her spirit. Yet behind the courteous masks and polite smiles lay a storm of unspoken emotion. Each glance across the room, each fleeting moment of shared attention carried with it a mixture of admiration, judgment, and suppressed longing. Elizabeth could feel the weight of his scrutiny as sharply as a hand on her shoulder, and Darcy could sense, beneath her teasing and mild reproach, the honesty and courage that made ordinary social encounters feel trivial in comparison. The assembly continued around them, oblivious to the silent tension threading the air between these two remarkable individuals. But those who looked closely could perceive it, the quiet electricity that refused to be ignored. And then, just as Elizabeth allowed herself a fleeting moment of amusement at his reticent formality, Darcy's gaze sharpened, and for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, a challenge, a question, a recognition of kindred strength. In that moment, the grand ballroom with its glittering chandeliers and swirling dancers became a world unto itself, a place where pride clashed with desire, where every movement, every word carried significance far beyond the ordinary. And yet, as the dance drew to an end, a question hung in the air, invisible yet undeniable. Could two such strong-willed hearts, so different in every way, ever reconcile their pride with the undeniable pull that bound them? Elizabeth retreated, aware of her own racing thoughts, her pulse quickened not merely by exertion, but by the strange, thrilling weight of attention. Darcy, standing tall amidst the swirl of laughter and music, clenched his jaw subtly, aware of his own conflicting sensations: admiration, frustration, attraction, and the faintest hint of fear at the vulnerability. The morning after the assembly, Pemberley's grounds seemed deceptively calm, yet beneath the serene surface, thoughts of the previous evening weighed heavily on Elizabeth's mind. Every glance, every gesture, every word exchanged with Mr. Darcy replayed with unnerving clarity. Her curiosity had become an insistent whisper, questioning his intentions, his pride, and whether the slightest hint of admiration she sensed was real, or merely the illusion of polite observation. Her sisters, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension between her and this formidable gentleman, chattered freely about the dances and the fashions, yet Elizabeth's mind wandered back to the memory of his sharp gaze, the faint crease of his brow when she teased, the subtle weight of judgment in every sentence he spoke. Darcy, in his turn, wrestled with the persistent conflict within himself. He had never encountered a woman who so effortlessly challenged both his patience and his pride. She spoke boldly, without pretense, yet with a clarity of insight that unsettled his carefully constructed self-control. To the world, he remained the reserved, distant man, aloof and unapproachable, but Elizabeth had penetrated the barriers he so meticulously maintained. In the quiet of his study, he replayed every interaction, analyzing every gesture, every tone, every laugh, questioning why her presence left him both intrigued and unsettled. It was not mere admiration, it was something more dangerous, something he had no right to entertain, yet could not suppress. Their interactions in the following days became a delicate dance of observation and subtle provocation. At social visits, Elizabeth found herself noticing his presence before anyone else did, anticipating his commentary, measuring her words for both defense and delight. Darcy, simultaneously, became attuned to her moods, detecting the slightest curl of her lips, the quickening of her step, the glimmer of mischief or challenge in her eyes. Each encounter was carefully orchestrated by circumstance, yet seemed fated, a collision of wills and intellects that neither could fully control. Even when apart, the echo of the other lingered, her laughter in a distant room, his silent disapproval in a corridor, creating a tension neither could articulate, but both felt with the intensity of a storm brewing just out of sight. It was in the quiet moments, away from society's scrutiny, that truths and vulnerabilities began to surface, though often cloaked in irony or restraint. Elizabeth found herself uncharacteristically contemplative, pondering not only Darcy's pride and apparent aloofness, but the complexities of his character, the integrity hidden beneath his haughty demeanor, the intensity of his feelings veiled behind measured words, the loyalty and honor that guided every action, however subtly. And Darcy, for all his deliberation and control, began to recognize the honesty. Days turned into weeks, and the unspoken connection between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy began to deepen in ways neither expected, though neither dared to acknowledge it aloud. Every encounter was a careful balancing act, a chess game of civility and restraint. At social visits, Elizabeth found herself observing Darcy more than the room itself. The angle of his posture, the subtle lift of an eyebrow, the measured restraint in his voice. And Darcy, ever deliberate, could not escape the magnetic pull she exerted, even as he chastised himself for allowing emotion to seep into his carefully controlled world. Pride, he told himself, must govern reason. Yet every glance at Elizabeth reminded him of the folly in thinking he could govern a heart stirred by intellect, wit, and spirit. It was during one particularly quiet afternoon at Longbourn, when the sun cast a golden glow across the drawing room, that the first cracks in perception began to appear. Elizabeth, absorbed in her reading, felt the sudden weight of observation upon her, though no one spoke. Turning, she saw Darcy across the room, watching, not critically, not with disdain, but with a deliberate intensity that left her unsettled and curious. Their eyes met, and in that instant the world contracted to a single point: recognition, tension, curiosity, and fear intertwined in a fleeting but unforgettable moment. She knew she should look away, that etiquette demanded it, yet some inexplicable force held her gaze. And Darcy, feeling the pull of the same invisible thread, could not retreat. Each felt the magnetic energy of the other, as undeniable as it was disconcerting, as thrilling as it was forbidden. Yet society, with its rules, expectations, and insistent scrutiny, was never idle. Rumors, misinterpretations, and gossip began to swirl, threatening to distort every subtle interaction. Elizabeth learned of conversations overheard, half-truths relayed by well-meaning acquaintances, and assumptions made with no knowledge of intent. Each tidbit of information tested her judgment, her restraint, and her ability to navigate the delicate balance between curiosity and propriety. Darcy, in turn, faced subtle challenges to his reputation, accusations and insinuations that he could neither fully counter nor ignore. And in the midst of it all, the tension between them remained unbroken, growing more urgent even as society's walls pressed ever closer. A letter from Jane, Elizabeth's gentle and insightful sister, arrived with news that threatened to shift the fragile equilibrium entirely. Jane's words were careful, measured, filled with both concern and insight. She hinted at Darcy's character, at his loyalty, at the integrity he demonstrated even in moments of apparent arrogance. Yet she also warned of the dangers of misjudgment, of relying on pride or first impressions, of allowing curiosity and emotion to overrule prudence. Elizabeth read and reread the letter, sensing in it both guidance and challenge, a call to observe, to think critically, and yet to remain open to the subtle truths that lay beneath behavior, words, and appearances. Darcy, for his part, received a similar correspondence, though in his case it was filtered through social networks, mutual acquaintances, and the discreet observation of his own family. He was reminded, gently but firmly, that first impressions could deceive, that propriety often masked deeper feeling, and that the heart and mind were rarely in harmony with appearances alone. These missives, subtle as they were, became a lens through which both Darcy and Elizabeth began to reassess their judgments, not merely of each other, but of themselves, of pride, and of the invisible threads that bound them. In a rare, quiet moment, Elizabeth ventured alone into the gardens, hoping to find solace in the familiar paths and gentle sunlight. Yet even here, fate had other designs. Darcy appeared, unexpectedly, along the same path, his presence commanding attention even in the soft glow of the afternoon. Conversation was hesitant at first, a delicate weaving of civility and unspoken curiosity. Words were chosen with care, each phrase an examination, a test, a subtle revelation of thought and feeling. Elizabeth challenged him gently, teasingly, observing his reaction with acute attention. Darcy responded with measured caution, yet the restraint could not fully contain the fascination that surged beneath. Each knew that the garden, seemingly tranquil, had become a stage for subtle revelations, where pride, attraction, and intellect collided in quiet, potent intensity. The dialogue, though polite, was layered with unspoken tension. Darcy admitted, indirectly, to his admiration, though he couched it in observation and critique rather than confession. Elizabeth responded with wit and skepticism, yet even she could not disguise the flutter of intrigue, the acknowledgement that this man, so proud, so deliberate, so controlled, held a power over her thoughts and emotions that she had never anticipated. Each pause, each glance, each careful word reinforced the invisible bond forming between them, a bond charged with complexity, uncertainty, and a compelling sense of inevitability. And yet, for all the subtle progress, misunderstandings festered like hidden embers. Observers misinterpreted. Days turned into weeks, and the unspoken connection between Elizabeth Bennet